Welcome back. Today's story will make you question what true genius looks like and whether it always wears a suit, holds a degree, or comes from privilege. Imagine this. The world's richest man is stranded, his prized private jet crippled by an engine failure no team of experts can solve. Just when all hope seems lost, a homeless girl steps forward and says the unthinkable. If you permit, I will fix it. Now, opinions split here. Some will scoff. How could someone with no home, no education, no standing possibly succeed where elite engineers failed? Others might feel a spark of belief. That brilliance can be found anywhere, even in the shadows society ignores. Here's what we'll uncover. How a desperate billionaire collided with an invisible girl no one believed in, the moment arrogance met humility and lost. Why courage sometimes matters more than credentials, and the astonishing power behind the words, if you permit, I will fix it. So stay with me, because what begins as a mechanical failure soon becomes a revelation about humanity itself. It happened on a crisp autumn morning. At a private airfield tucked away from the public eye, the billionaire's jet sat motionless inside a cavernous hangar. From the outside, it was flawless. Sleek lines of polished silver, wings stretching like a bird of prey. But inside, the left engine, an engineering marvel worth millions, was silent, refusing to start. Edward Harland, the billionaire in question, was a man who rarely heard the word no. His life was built on bending reality to his will. With empires in finance and technology, he had grown used to paying for solutions. But today, no amount of money could bring his jet to life. Around him, a dozen engineers swarmed. Experts from Germany, the US, Japan, each brought in at staggering cost. Diagnostic laptops blinked. Tools clattered. Conversations dropped into frustrated whispers. Edward paced with storm in his chest. He was supposed to be in Geneva within hours, finalizing a deal that would add another crown jewel to his empire. Every passing minute cost him not just money, but pride. Finally, his patience cracked. What's the verdict? He snapped. The lead engineer, a man with a spotless record and the confidence of someone used to solving the unsolvable, adjusted his glasses. Sir, we've tested everything. The controls respond, the electronics function, but the engine, it refuses to cycle. We've never seen this precise fault before. Edward's jaw tightened. You mean to tell me the brightest mind's money can't fix my engine? Silence. Shuffling feet. Eyes that avoided his. And then from the edge of the hangar came a voice. Quiet, almost uncertain, yet piercing through the heavy air. If you permit, I will fix it. Heads turned. By the service entrance stood a girl. 19, maybe 20. Her hoodie was faded, her jeans frayed, and her hair a tangled mess. Grease stained her hands, as if she had wrestled with machines all her life. She didn't belong in this pristine, sterile world of million-dollar jets. She belonged to the streets outside. The engineers scoffed. One laughed outright. Who let her in here? Edward's gaze sharpened. And who are you? The girl swallowed before speaking. My name is Alara. I know engines. Not from schools or labs, but from fixing whatever I could find. Broken cars, old generators, discarded scraps. I've studied them my whole life. The engineers rolled their eyes. One whispered, ridiculous. Another muttered, she'll make things worse. But Alara's voice steadied. You've all tested with computers. I listen. Machines speak when they fail. If you let me touch it, hear it, feel it, I'll know what's wrong. Her words sounded almost absurd, yet there was something in her eyes, an intensity, a confidence, that made Edward pause. He glanced at the clock. Hours had been lost. His empire hung in limbo. And here was a girl, filthy, poor, claiming she could do what geniuses could not. What do I have to lose? He murmured. The chief engineer stepped forward, indignant. Sir, you cannot be serious. This girl isn't certified. She could cause catastrophic damage. Edward raised a hand to silence him. You've had 6 hours and nothing. Let her try. Gasps rippled. The engineers exchanged looks of outrage, disbelief. Edward ignored them. His eyes stayed on Alara. Prove it. Her lips parted slightly. Surprised, he had agreed. Then, without hesitation, She walked toward the giant machine. Each step echoed in the cavernous hangar, as if she carried the weight of 100 doubting stares. She climbed the small ladder into the engine's access panel. The smell of fuel and hot metal filled her lungs. To most, it was suffocating. To her, it was familiar, even comforting. She placed her palm on the turbine casing, leaned close, listening like one might listen to a heartbeat. "What is she doing?" An engineer whispered, incredulous. Ilera tapped lightly on a valve, tracing wires, feeling bolts. To them, it was chaos. To her, it was language. The faint rattle here, the unnatural resistance there, clues invisible to the naked eye, but clear to someone who knew how to listen. She leaned back and said, "It's not the electronics, not the control system. The compressor vane alignment is off. One blade is out of sequence, choking the airflow. That's why it won't stabilize." The lead engineer nearly laughed. "Nonsense. Diagnostics would have shown that." Ilera didn't flinch. "Not if the misalignment is subtle. Computers see instability, but they can't tell you why. This isn't about data. It's about rhythm." Edward studied her carefully. "And you can fix it?" Her eyes didn't waver. "If you permit." For a moment, the hangar was utterly silent. Then Edward said, "Do it." A wave of protest broke out. The engineers objected, their voices sharp with panic. But Edward silenced them with a single glance. Ilera pulled herself deeper into the machine. Her hands moved with precision, a blend of delicacy and strength. She tightened, loosened, adjusted, like a musician coaxing harmony from a stubborn instrument. Minutes became 20. Sweat dripped into her eyes. Grease coated her fingers. But she pressed on. Finally, she emerged, face streaked, breath heavy. "It's ready," she whispered. The chief engineer sneered. "She fiddled with bolts. That's all. This is absurd." Edward ignored him. His gaze locked on Ilera. "You're sure?" "Yes." He gave the order. The ignition sequence began. The hangar went silent. The engine coughed once, twice. A deep rumble shook the ground. Then, with a roar that sent vibrations through the walls, the turbine spun alive. Its hum was steady, strong, magnificent. Every head turned. Eyes widened. Clipboards slipped from hands. A machine worth millions had yielded. Not to science, not to degrees, but to the touch of a homeless girl. Edward's lips parted. For the first time in decades, he was speechless. Ilera climbed down, her hoodie stained black, her hair falling into her eyes. She didn't boast. She didn't even smile. She only murmured, "Told you it was stuck." Edward stared at her, and for the briefest moment, the titan of industry felt something rare, humility. Around them, the engineers remained frozen, their pride shattered. None of them could explain what had just happened. But Edward knew this was no accident. And what neither he nor Ilera yet realized was that this moment, this spark, was only the beginning of something far greater. The billionaire, Richard Harland, was a man used to solving problems with money. If something broke, he replaced it. If someone failed him, he fired them. But this time, his wealth seemed powerless. The jet engine that powered his prized private aircraft had developed a fault so complex that even the world's top engineers threw up their hands. Teams from Rolls-Royce, GE, and Pratt & Whitney had all examined it. They ran simulations, tore it apart, ran diagnostics for weeks. The answer was always the same: impossible to fix. Each report ended with a polite but crushing verdict: scrap the engine, buy a new one, and accept the downtime. For Richard, this wasn't just about the money. It was about pride. His jet was more than a machine. It was his freedom, his symbol of being untouchable. And now, that symbol sat grounded in his private hangar, like a useless relic. Mechanics bustled around, engineers whispered each other in defeat, and Richard's patience thinned by the hour. He offered double their pay, then triple, promising bonuses that could buy a mansion. Nothing worked. The experts shook their heads and quietly backed away. But fate has a strange sense of timing. On a particularly humid afternoon, while Richard was pacing outside the hangar, a thin young girl stood by the chain-link fence. Her clothes were worn, Her hair tied back with a frayed shoelace, and her sneakers looked like they'd walked through every mile of the city. To most, she was invisible, a homeless girl drifting through the edges of society. But her eyes didn't wander aimlessly. They were fixed on the massive jet engine sitting under the harsh hangar lights. She watched the workers, the frustrated engineers, the billionaire scowling with his arms crossed. And then, almost too softly to notice, she spoke. "If you permit, I will fix it." The word seemed absurd. The guard standing nearby chuckled under his breath. One of the engineers frowned, thinking he had misheard. Richard turned sharply, his gaze landing on the girl who barely reached his shoulder. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Everyone assumed she was joking or perhaps delusional, but her expression was steady. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't mocking. She said it again, louder this time, her voice carrying over the whirring of cooling fans and clinking of drop tools. "If you permit, I will fix it." The men around Richard exchanged looks, half amused, half annoyed. Some muttered that she should be removed immediately, but something in Richard's gut told him not to dismiss her so quickly. Maybe it was a desperation gnawing at him. Maybe it was a fire in her eyes that didn't match her appearance. Against every instinct as a man of status, he walked closer, studying her face as though searching for the punchline to her statement. "Do you even know what you're looking at?" he asked finally, his voice sharp but tinged with curiosity. She didn't flinch. Her gaze returned to the massive jet engine. "I know exactly what I'm looking at, and I know why they can't fix it." The word stunned the group into silence. One of the senior engineers scoffed. "Do you have any idea how many years of training it takes to understand that engine?" "You couldn't possibly," but she cut him off with a calm, unshaken tone. "You've all been looking at the same problem from the same angle. That's why you can't see the solution." Richard tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. The audacity of this girl was almost insulting, but the conviction in her voice held weight. She wasn't begging. She wasn't bluffing. She was certain. He gestured toward the hangar doors. "Fine. Come inside. Show me what you think you know." The guards hesitated, uneasy about letting her step past the boundary. But Richard's word was final. She walked in slowly, her footsteps echoing against the polished concrete floor. For the first time, she stood beneath the towering engine. Her fingers brushed the metal as though she were greeting an old friend, not a machine worth millions. The engineers folded their arms, whispering amongst themselves. Some smirked, waiting for her to embarrass herself. Richard watched with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, arms crossed tightly across his chest. The girl leaned down, studying the lower intake panels. She didn't reach for tools immediately. Instead, she listened. She placed her ear close, tapped aside gently, and closed her eyes. To everyone else, it was absurd, a child's game. But to her, each sound told a story. After a few moments, she spoke. "This engine isn't broken," she said softly. "It's misunderstood." Her words struck a nerve. An engineer barked a laugh. Another rolled his eyes. But Richard noticed the way she traced her hand along the turbine casing, pausing at specific points with uncanny precision. She crouched, pointing to a cluster of overlooked bolts. "Here, you all thought the problem was in the fuel distribution line. But it isn't. It's resonance. This chamber is vibrating at a frequency the software doesn't account for. That's why your tests fail. The machine isn't lying to you. It's telling you where it hurts. You just weren't listening." The room fell silent. The engineers stopped their muttering, realizing she wasn't speaking in vague guesses. She was pinpointing details only someone with intimate mechanical understanding could know. Richard narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. "How do you know this? Who taught you?" She straightened, brushing dust from her hands. "No one taught me. I've been around machines my whole life. When I lost my home, the scrapyard became my school. Engines, motors, compressors. I studied them because they were all I had. They spoke to me when no one else would." Her voice didn't waver, though her eyes revealed a quiet sadness buried beneath determination. Richard studied her carefully. Something in his gut told him she wasn't bluffing. He gave a sharp nod to the head mechanic. Get her the tools she needs. The mechanic froze. Sir, are you sure? I said get them. Richard's voice cut like steel. The girl was handed a battered toolbox, far too heavy for her slight frame. Yet she carried it with practiced ease, kneeling by the engine as though this was where she belonged. For the first time in weeks, there was a spark of hope flickering in that hangar. She opened the toolbox slowly, her fingers grazing the worn handles as though reacquainting herself with old companions. Each tool bore marks of countless jobs, scratches, faded grips, dents that told stories. She selected a small wrench, then a flathead screwdriver, moving with precision, like a surgeon preparing for an operation. The engineers gathered around, expecting a spectacle, maybe even a disaster. Some leaned in with smug expressions, ready to pounce at the first mistake. Yet the girl ignored them. Her world had narrowed down to the engine before her. She loosened the bolt she had pointed out earlier, working carefully, not rushing. The clang of metal echoed softly, almost rhythmically, as if she were keeping time with the heartbeat of the machine. Richard stood a few steps behind, his eyes locked on her every move. He found himself holding his breath, something he hadn't done in years. He had hired the best minds in the industry, men and women with degrees that filled entire walls, and yet none of them had touched the engine the way this girl just had. There was something almost intimate in the way she worked, as though she understood its pain better than its own makers. At one point, she pressed her ear against the casing again, tightening one bolt, then loosening another by a fraction. "It's not about force," she murmured. "It's about harmony. If one piece fights the others, the whole system suffers." One of the engineers scoffed. "Engines don't have harmony. They have physics." Without looking up, she replied, "Physics is harmony. You've just forgotten how to hear it." The words cut deeper than she knew. Richard's lips twitched, the faintest hint of a smile threatening to break his stony facade. He couldn't deny it. The girl spoke with conviction that made the room itself feel different. Hours passed, though to her, time seemed irrelevant. Sweat clung to her brow. Streaks of grease lined her arms. But her focus never wavered. At times she muttered softly, half to herself, half to the machine. The others grew restless, whispering doubts. But Richard silenced them with a sharp glance. He wanted to see where this would lead. Finally, she stepped back, wiping her hands on a ragged cloth tucked into her pocket. "It's ready," she said quietly. The room stiffened. An engineer shook his head. "Impossible. There's no way." But Richard raised a hand, silencing him. He motioned toward the control panel. "Start it." The mechanic hesitated. "Sir, if it fails again, it could—" "Start it," Richard repeated firmly. The hangar lights dimmed as the engine whirred to life. For a tense moment, it sputtered, the same way it had in every failed attempt before. Sparks threatened at the edges. A deep metallic groan echoed through the chamber. But then something shifted. The vibration smoothed, the rattling subsided, and the once violent roar settled into a steady, thunderous hum. The homeless girl closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. The harmony she had promised was real, palpable. It was as if the engine had been healed. Gasps filled the room. Engineers leaned in, checking readings, struggling to comprehend what their eyes and instruments confirmed. The impossible had been done. For the first time in weeks, Richard felt his chest loosen, the weight lifting. His prized machine, the symbol of his empire, was alive again, and it was all because of a girl who had nothing but her instinct and stubborn belief. He looked at her, standing there in tattered clothes, streaked with grease, a quiet pride in her eyes. She hadn't just fixed his engine. She had proven every single person in that room wrong. But Richard's mind was already racing. If she could do this here, under pressure, without resources, what else was she capable of? Applause erupted before anyone could stop themselves. It wasn't polite, hesitant clapping. It was raw, astonished, almost desperate applause, the kind born from weeks of frustration suddenly breaking into relief. But just as quickly, the sound died when Richard raised his hand. His gaze was fixed entirely on the girl. She stood still, not smiling, not basking in the praise. Her chest rose and fell with quiet exhaustion, yet her eyes were steady. She hadn't done this for approval. She had done it because she couldn't bear to see a machine suffer under misunderstanding. Richard stepped forward slowly, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete. He stopped only a few feet away from her, studying her face as if trying to decipher a riddle. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice softened now, stripped of arrogance. She hesitated. For a moment, it seemed she might not answer. Then, with a quiet strength, she said, "No one, just a girl who listens." The words landed with more weight than any elaborate introduction could have. No one, just a girl. And yet she had achieved what the best and brightest could not. The engineers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at the floor, ashamed of their earlier laughter. Others still fought their disbelief, whispering excuses. That was luck that the engine had coincidentally aligned. But deep down, they knew the truth. She had seen what they could not. Richard's thoughts churned. He saw opportunity, potential, and risk. A girl like this could disrupt everything. If she remained in the shadows, the world might never know her. But if she were to be elevated, given the right platform, she could change the game entirely. "Come with me," he said at last. The girl blinked. "What?" "Don't waste your gift on scrap heaps and alleys. Work for me. Name your price." His words were crisp, authoritative, the same tone he used to close billion-dollar deals. But she shook her head almost immediately. "I don't want money." Richard raised an eyebrow. Few people had ever said that to him. "Then what do you want?" She paused, her eyes drifting back to the engine as it purred steadily, like a beast finally at peace. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but every person in the hangar heard it. "I want a place where I belong." The sentence pierced the air like glass shattering. For a moment, Richard felt something stir in him, a memory of his own youth, of clawing his way up from obscurity, searching for a place where he was more than just another hungry face in the crowd. He nodded slowly. "Then you'll have it." The engineers exchanged glances, shocked, some even indignant. Richard was a man known for discarding failures without a second thought. Yet here he was, extending his hand to a homeless girl who had just walked in off the street. But he didn't care what they thought. He could see what they could not. Talent that defied logic, raw and unpolished but undeniable. She hesitated again, her dirty, calloused hands twitching slightly as if afraid to reach out. For so long, every offer she received from strangers came with strings. Empty promises, hidden traps. But something in Richard's eyes told her this was different. Not kindness, not pity, recognition. Finally, she extended her hand. Their fingers met, a fragile, unlikely handshake between a billionaire and a girl who had slept on cold concrete just the night before. At that moment, Richard didn't just gain an engineer. He gained a reminder. That brilliance would be found in the most forgotten corners, that sometimes the world's most broken places hid its most extraordinary people. And for the girl, it wasn't about engines or money or prestige. For the first time in her life, she felt the possibility of home. News of the miracle spread faster than wildfire. Within days, whispers left the hangar and trickled into boardrooms, headlines, and eventually the global stage. A billionaire's grounded jet, restored not by world-class engineers, but by a nameless homeless girl. Some called it inspiring. Others called it impossible. The press swarmed at the gates of Richard's estate, desperate for a glimpse of a mysterious girl. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward with questions sharp as knives. Who is she? Where did she come from? Is this a publicity stunt? Richard shielded her as best he could, whisking her past a frenzy and into the safety of private walls. Yet even inside, the storm brewed. His team of engineers, the same men and women who had once mocked her, were furious. Some demanded her removal, citing safety concerns and unprofessional conduct. Others claimed she had sabotaged the engine first, to make herself look like a savior. Meetings turned heated. One executive slammed his fist on the table. "You're risking everything on a street girl. Investors will think you've lost control." Richard's jaw tightened. He had spent his life commanding loyalty through fear and results. But this was different. He wasn't defending a quarterly report. He was defending a person. "She fixed what none of you could," he said coldly. "Respect that, or walk out." The room fell silent. though resentment lingered in their eyes. Meanwhile, the girl herself struggled under the weight of sudden attention. She had lived invisible for so long, drifting through alleys unseen, unheard. Now the world was staring, dissecting her every move. She shrank from the cameras, from the reporters who painted her either as a prodigy or fraud. She hadn't asked for fame, only a place to belong. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered back to the hangar. The engine sat quietly in the dim light, no longer groaning in pain. She pressed her hand against its surface, whispering softly, "At least you understand me." But she wasn't alone. Richard entered quietly, watching her from the shadows before stepping forward. "You're not wrong," he said. "Machines don't judge. People do." She turned, startled, then lowered her eyes. "Maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe they're right. I don't fit in this world of suits and money." Richard shook his head. "You don't have to fit their world. You'll build your own, and they'll have no choice but to follow." His words struck something deep inside her, a belief she had buried long ago. For years she had survived, never daring to dream. But now, standing in the glow of the man who had given her a chance, she felt the stirrings of a different future. Still, challenges loomed. The aviation industry buzzed with skepticism. Rival companies mocked the idea that a homeless girl could solve what their best minds could not. Journalists dug into her past, searching for scandal, weakness, anything to tear down the fragile myth forming around her. Through it all, Richard remained steadfast, placing her beside him in meetings, giving her the floor to speak, letting her insights guide decisions that baffled even seasoned experts. Every time she spoke, doubters grew quieter. Every time she solved a problem, resistance cracked a little more. Yet, not everyone was ready to accept her. A powerful competitor, threatened by the attention Richard's company was receiving, plotted to expose her, to discredit her in front of the world. They believed she was a fluke, a lucky accident, not a true genius. And they were determined to prove it. The storm was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. The challenge came sooner than expected. Richard's fiercest rival, a tycoon named Harrington, issued a public statement. If this so-called miracle worker is truly what they claim, let her prove it. One engine may be luck. Let's see her face something no engineer has ever solved. The media latched onto it instantly. The world wanted spectacle. Could a homeless girl truly stand against decades of established science and industry? Or would she finally crumble under the weight of expectation? Richard presented her with the choice privately. "You don't have to do this," he said. "They're setting you up to fail. If you walk away now, you've already proven more than enough." But she shook her head. Fear flickered in her eyes, yes, but so did fire. "If I run now, then maybe they're right. I didn't come this far to prove myself to them. I came this far to prove myself to me." And so, under the gaze of the world, she stepped into a rival hangar filled with reporters, cameras, and skeptical experts. At the center of the arena stood a monstrous prototype engine, one that had bankrupted teams of scientists, a machine so unstable it was considered cursed. The murmurs around her were cruel. "She'll get herself killed. This is madness. A billionaire's circus act." But she blocked them out, placing her hand gently against the engine as she always did, as though greeting an old friend. Silence fell as she closed her eyes, listening, feeling. Minutes passed, and then she began her work. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. Each adjustment was small, almost insignificant to naked eye. But together they formed a rhythm, a dialogue between her and the machine. She didn't force the engine into submission. She coaxed it into balance, respecting its nature instead of fighting against it. Reporters whispered nervously as the hours dragged on. Harrington smirked, certain she would fail, certain the girl was nothing more than a spark soon to be extinguished. Finally, she straightened, wiping the sweat and grime from her forehead. She gave a simple nod. "Start it." The room held its breath. The ignition sequence began. For a moment, chaos erupted. Sparks flew. The beast roared. The hangar walls trembled. People ducked, covering their ears, waiting for the inevitable explosion. But it didn't come. The vibrations softened. The chaotic roar smoothed into a steady, breathtaking rhythm, deeper and more powerful than anything they'd ever heard. The impossible machine was alive, stable, elegant, magnificent. The hangar erupted in disbelief. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing wildly. Engineers stared at their monitors, struggling to reconcile the data with their eyes. Harrington's smug smile dissolved into horror. His trap had become her triumph. Richard's chest swelled with pride, but he said nothing. This wasn't his victory. It was hers. She stood silently in the center of it all, not triumphant, not boastful, but calm. She had proven what she already knew deep inside. She was not defined by the streets, by hunger, or by abandonment. She was defined by her gift, by the way she saw the world in rhythms and harmonies others ignored. One reporter shouted the question on everyone's mind. "Who are you?" She paused, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. And then, with the same quiet conviction she had spoken with in that first hangar, she replied, "I am no one, and that's why I can hear what others can't." The room erupted again, but her words lingered, echoing beyond the hangar, beyond the headlines, into the hearts of everyone who heard them. Because in that moment, she wasn't just a girl who fixed engines. She was proof that greatness could come from forgotten, that genius could be born in the shadows, that sometimes the most broken souls carry the most powerful light. And as the engine purred behind her, steady and alive, Richard knew the truth. This was only the beginning. And so, what began as an engine no one could fix became a story no one will forget. A billionaire's jet, a machine worth millions, restored not by degrees or wealth, but by a girl the world had overlooked. Her story is not about engines. It's about us, about the voices we ignore, the talents we dismiss, the people we pass by without a second thought. Because sometimes, the answers we search for in the brightest places are waiting quietly in the shadows. So ask yourself, how many miracles have we walked past today? How many lives? How many ideas? How many hidden geniuses remain unseen simply because no one believed in them? Remember her story the next time you're tempted to judge someone by what they lack instead of what they hold inside. Greatness doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears torn shoes and carries a heart stubborn enough to listen when the rest of the world refuses. If this story moved you, share it. Let others hear it. Because who knows? The person who needs to believe in themselves again might just be listening right now.